We begin today in the Gemara on Daf Mem Aleph, the second line from the top of the Yomid. Going back to what it said in the Mishnah regarding the Kohen Gadol reading from the Sefer Torah on Yom Kippur. The Mishnah said, V'koire achrei mais. He reads first achrei mais. Then he reads also from Va'ach Ba'aser, which is in Parshas Emor, a few Parshas later. All right, so basically he's skipping. You have to roll the Sefer Torah and skip a few Parshas. So this the Gemara asks, V'ramini, I'll ask you a contradiction from what it says in the Mishnah Megillah. Medalgin ben Navi, only if you're reading from Navi, like a Haftarah or something like that. So over there you're allowed to skip from one place to another. But ve'im medalgin b'Torah. In Torah you're not allowed to skip. So how could the Mishnah say that he's skipping from Parshas Achrei to Parshas Emor? Amar Abaye, so Abaye answers, Lo kashya, it's not a contradiction. Kan in the Mishnah there where it says that you should not skip in Torah, that's because you're skipping to a parsha that you have to roll, and it's going to take long enough that by the time the translator, and the times of the Beis HaMikdash there was a translator, by the time he finishes translating, there's still going to be an interruption. So therefore you shouldn't skip. But over here our Mishnah is saying, how long are you skipping for? From Achrei to Emor? That's just a few, you have to be geilo, it takes mamash a few seconds. So therefore by the time the Torgum finishes, you're at your place. So there's no problem. But the Gemara doesn't accept this answer. Frek the Gemara, but on that Mishnah there, we learned a Braise that clarifies and says, Medalgin ben Navi ve'im medalgin b'Torah, that in Navi you're allowed to skip, but in Torah you're not allowed to skip. And then the Braise says, Va'at kama medalgin, and even in Navi, when it says that you're allowed to skip, how far are you allowed to skip? At kidei shelo yifsek hatorgimen. Only if, when you're skipping, you won't have to wait after the translator finishes translating. So what do we see from this? Miklal. So from this we understand the b'Torah klal and klal loy, that in Torah you can't skip at all. So how can we say that in Torah, as long as there'll be no break from after the Turguman finishes translating, that you're allowed to skip? Elamar Abaye. So Abaye says another answer. This is actually based on the previous answer, but he adds another point here. Like Hashye, so it's not a contradiction. Kan be'inyan echad. When it says that you're allowed to skip, that's if you're skipping from one parsha to another, but it's all discussing the same subject. In other words, in addition to the point that we said before, that you're skipping a short distance and therefore there won't be any break, the second point is it's all in the same subject. So then, even in Torah, you're allowed to skip. And kan b'shnei inyanim. But if you're skipping from one parsha to another, even if it's short and there won't be any hefsek, but if it's a different subject, if you'd go from reading about Yom Kippur to reading about something else which has nothing to do with Yom Kippur, then you're not allowed to skip, even if there won't be any break. And Rashi explains that the point of the difference between Torah and Navi is, Torah is teaching you the mitzvahs. If you go from one mitzvah to another mitzvah, the person gets confused and he doesn't realize, he forgets what was being taught to him, and therefore he might hear the mitzvahs not properly, and he'll make a mistake. Navi, though, when you're reading from Navi, it's not mamash a mitzvah, it's not halachas mitzvah. So therefore, even if you get confused from one inyan to another inyan, it's not something that bothers us. As long as there won't be a tircha for the tzibur, that you can go from one inyan to the next without the break of the metorgim, by Navi that's okay. But by Torah you have to have both conditions. It shouldn't be a break, and it should be the same inyan, so the person shouldn't get confused.
The Olam knows what the guy's reading. In those times they didn't have chumash.
But they're listening for what they did now. They're listening. They have a Torgum and they have a translator as well. Well, Tanya, the Gemara brings a Braise that proves this answer that we just said. It says it clearly as a medalgin b'Torah be'inyan echad. In Torah, you are allowed to skip from one place to another as long as it's the same subject. B'Navi b'shnei inyanim. And by Navi, you can skip from one inyan to another, even if it's not the same inyan. And v'kan, both by Torah and Navi, what are we speaking about? And that in a time when the Torgimen won't be a break after you finish translating. The ein medalgin mi Navi leNavi. You're not allowed to skip from one Navi to another Navi. But there's the Sefer of Trei Asar, where you have 12 different Nevi'im that are included in one Sefer. It's considered to be one Sefer, so you are allowed to skip from one Navi to another. As long as you're not skipping and going back from one that's at the later to one that's earlier. If you're skipping from earlier to later, that you're allowed. It's considered to be one Sefer. Going back to the Mishnah, it said, So then you roll the Torah and the Sefer Torah, the Kohen holds it on his lap. Chulu, what did the Mishnah say afterwards? That the Kohen has to let everybody know that more than what I read for you here is written in the Sefer Torah. In other words, he's telling the people, even what I'm going to continue saying Baal Peh, because he continues saying Baal Peh from Parshas Pinchas, you should know that even though I'm not reading it from the Sefer Torah, but it's there. Why does he have to say this? For kol kach lama, why is it necessary for him to say this? Shalei lo hitzilaz al Sefer Torah, in order that people shouldn't begin saying, oh, he's reading it Baal Peh, it must be the Sefer Torah doesn't have it written in it. It's a apostle of Sefer Torah, so therefore he has to let people know that it's a good Sefer Torah. And then from there, the Parsha of Aser, which is in Chumash HaPikudim and Chumash Bamidbar and Parshas Pinchas, that he reads Baal Peh. Why doesn't he roll the Sefer Torah until Pinchas and read inside the Sefer Torah? You're not allowed to roll the Sefer Torah when the tzibur is waiting. Like we said before already, that to roll the Sefer Torah from Parshas Emor till Parshas Pinchas, the tzibur is going to have to wait, so therefore you can't roll the Sefer Torah. Frag the Gemara, but why does he have to read it Baal Peh? V'leisi Sefer Torah achrine v'likri. Let him bring another Sefer Torah and read from a second Sefer Torah. So the Gemara gives two answers. Because if he's going to bring a second Sefer Torah, then people will say, oh, there must have been a psul in the first Sefer Torah. That's why they're bringing the second Sefer Torah. Rab Shimon ben Lakish says, we don't want to cause that you should have to say a bracha that's not necessary. That if you're going to bring a second Sefer Torah, so what happens? You have to make a new bracha, a new bracha Torah when you start reading from the Sefer Torah. Frag the Gemara, how can we say this? Are we concerned about bringing a second Sefer Torah that people are going to say that the first Sefer Torah is possible? But for Rabbi Yitzchak Nafche said, Resh Chodesh Teves Shechali is b'Shabbos. Chodesh Teves falls out on the Shabbos. What happens? Maybe Shalish Torahs. Not only do you bring two, you bring three Torahs. And v'kaira, you read from three different Torahs. Achas minyan shel yom. One Sefer Torah you read the parsha of the day. V'achas shalish Chodesh. Then the second Sefer Torah you read from the Chodesh. V'achas b'shel Chanukah. The third you read from Chanukah. Okay, so what do you see over here? That you use three different Sefer Torahs. Okay, so there's no concern that people are going to say that the first Sefer Torah is possible. I mean, all the Mefarshim point out that the Gemara could have asked this question without bringing Rosh Chodesh Tevis. Any Rosh Chodesh that falls out on Shabbos. The Gemara could have made the same point. But for some reason, the different Hezbein and the Mefarshim say the Gemara brings a question dafka from Chanukah. So the Gemara answers, Tlasa Gavri, Betlasa Sifri, if it's three different people that are reading and making a bracha from three different Sefer Torahs, Leke Pagama. So over here, people are not going to say there's a pagam, because what does it look like? We're giving three different people the opportunity to read from three different Sefer Torahs. Chad Gavre, Betrei Sifri, but over here in the Beis HaMikdash, when it's only the Kohen Gadol that's reading on Yom Kippur, and he's reading from both Sefer Torahs, Ikke Pagama. Here it's the same person, it'll look like that he's reading from the second Sefer Torah because the first Sefer Torah is possible. Then the Mishnah said, the Kohen Gadol, it says 8 different brachas when he concludes reading from the Torah. Tana Rabbana, we learned in the Braisa, Mevarchen, ala Torah, the first bracha you say is on the Torah, Kederech Shem Mevarchen Beveis HaKnesses. The same bracha that you make in Shul when you finish reading from the Sefer Torah. Then Vala Aveda, a bracha on the Aveda that was done, which begins with the word Ritzei. And then Vala Idah, similar to the bracha of Meidim, Shmei Nesra. Then Val Mechilas Avein, a bracha on Mechilas Avein, which is similar to the bracha we say in Shmei Nesra and Yom Kippur about Mechilas Avein. Ketiknon, the way it's instituted to say it also in the shul when we daven. Then a bracha ala mikdash b'fnei atzma, a special bracha for the Beis HaMikdash, v'al kainim b'fnei atzma, a bracha for the kainim. Then al Yisrael b'fnei atzma for the Yidden, v'al Yerushalayim b'fnei atzma, and also a bracha for Yerushalayim. Actually, the Mishnah already brought the nusach more or less of these brachas. Then the Mishnah concluded and said, v'hashar tefillah. And then the rest, or after this, there's a tefillah. Meaning there's still another bracha that's said, which is a tefillah. What was this tefillah? Tana Rabbana, we learned in the Braisa. Hashar tefillah, tchina, rina, ubakasha. He said another bracha which included in it all these expressions of tefillah, tchina, rina, and bakasha. And it was as follows. Sha'amcha Yisrael tzrichim livosha. Your children need to be helped. V'chaisim. And he concludes the bracha, b'shemeya tefillah. Then Mikam ve'elech. Now the Braisa says, after this, when the Kohen Gadol finished reading from the Sefer Torah and Yom Kippur, what happened? Kol echad ve'echad maybe Sefer Torah mitoich Pesach. all Yidden would bring a Sefer Torah that they had from their home, and they would bring it into the Ezras Noshim, and they would all read from the Sefer Torah. What exactly they would read, I'm not sure, but they would all read from the Sefer Torah. Why? What was the point there? Of everyone bringing their own Sefer Torah into Azara to read from the Sefer Torah? V'kol kach loma, what's the point of this? Kedei laharais chazusai l'ravim. In order to show everybody its appearance or its beauty, the beauty of the Sefer Torah, Rashi says, Zeh kelev amveyu esna l'fanav b'mitzvahs, which is the beautiful Sefer Torah that are brought and read in the Azara at this time. Rashi here, though, addresses that it's Yom Kippur. How could they carry the Sefer Torah? So Rashi says two pshatim. Either Rashi says there is an opinion in the Gemara that says that you're allowed to carry on Yom Kippur. So that could be our Gemara's opinion here as well. Or Rashi says in Yerushalayim, they had walls around it, and you can close the doors. If you close the doors in Yerushalayim and you make the proper Erev Chatzeris, you're allowed to carry. You can bring the Sefer Torah. That's what Rashi says here. There is another place, although on Masechta Yuma, I believe Rashi says that they brought the Sefer Torah already from before Yom Kippur. And then they took it out. It was already delivered from before, and they read here in the Beis HaMikdash from all these Sifrei Torah. Okay, we continue the next Mishnah, and this is the Mishnah about the mitzvah of Hakel. So this year we're in a Shnas Hakel, and as you probably know, the Rebbe's Koch and Hakel, and how much the Rebbe said when they get to all the details of Hakel. There's a lot of different things to share when they get to the words of the Gemara here in Hakel. I'll share Bekitzer something from the Rebbe, see as much as time allows. Stop Teilige Mishnah, Parshas HaMelech Ketzat. So the Parsha of the Melech that he reads in the year of Hakel. So how was this done? So you see here, right here in the Mishnah, that it refers to Hakel as the Parsha of the Melech, meaning that this is the mitzvah of the Melech. There's a big discussion about this in Achrayim, and the Rebbe says, you see here, the Mishnah is saying that it's the mitzvah of the Melech. And it's the Melech's mitzvah to gather all the Yidden, the whole koyach, to bring achtas of the entire Klal Yisrael, comes from the Melech, from the king that's able to include everybody together. The Melech is the leiv of Kol Yisrael. So how does this happen? Matzi Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag. On Matzi Yom Tov, for the first day of Sukkot, B'Shmini over here, the Gemara will explain, really the Mishnah should say B'Shminis, that means in the 8th year after Shemitah, B'Matzi Shvi'is, the year after Shemitah. What do you do in the Beis HaMikdash? Oisen loy bime shel eitz. They would build a wooden platform in the Azara of the Beis HaMikdash. V'hu yeshiv aleh, the king sits there. Shanema, as the pasuk says, Miketz sheva shanim b'moyed v'goymer. That's when you come and read from the Sefer Torah. And now, similar to what it said regarding the Kohen Gadol reading from the Sefer Torah, who brings the Sefer Torah to the king? Chazna Knesses, Neitel Sefer Torah. The Chazan over here refers to the Shamish, that's the caretaker in the Azara. He brings the Sefer Torah. And he gives it to the Rosh Knesses, which is the Gabbai, that takes care and appoints everyone for their position of what they do. And then the Rosh Knesses Noisnal Isgan, he gives it to the second in command to the Kohen Gadol, that is. V'Asgan Noisnal Kohen Gadol. And then the Sgan gives the Sefer Torah to the Kohen Gadol, and the Kohen Gadol Noisnal Melech, and then he gives it to the king. V'Hamelech Oimid Umekabel, he gets up and he receives the Sefer Torah. And the Kohen, and he reads from the Sefer Torah Yeshiv when he's sitting. The Mishnah shares the story that happened towards the end of the second Beis HaMikdash, Agrifas HaMelech. The king then was not from Malchus Beis David, but he was a king that was, his name was Agrifas. He was a Melech Yisrael, but as Rashi says, he was also a descendant of Hordis. His mother was a Yid, but from his father, came from Goyim, from Hordis HaMelech. So Agrifas HaMelech, he was the king at that time, and Omad v'Kibul v'Kara Oimid. He took the Sefer Torah, and he read from the Sefer Torah standing. In other words, the reason that a melech is allowed to sit is because of the kavod of the melech. But Agrivas HaMelech forgave on his honor, and he sat. And he stood, that is. And he stood, and he read from the Sefer Torah. V'shebchu chachamim. And the chachamim praised him for what he did. When he came to the pasuk, one of the psukim that you read, that you're not allowed to appoint on you a guy to be a king, so Zol Goyen of the Mois, he began crying because his father is not a Yid. Amru Loi, the Chachamim said to him, Al tisyare Agrifes achinu ata. Don't be afraid, Agrifes, you are our brother. Achinu ata, you are our brother. So the Chachamim accepted him as a king. He was a Yid, and they accepted him as a king, and they told him it's okay. Now the Mishnah says, V'kaire mitchiles Eila Advarim. What do you read? So you read by Hakel from the beginning of Eila Advarim, Chumash Dvarim, Ad Shema, until where it says Shema in Parshas Vaschana. And then the Shema, you read the Shema also, and then you skip to V'hoyim Shemaya. Parshas Eikev, and then you skip from there to Aser, Kisachale la'aser. You read about Maisris, and the reason is because after the year Shemitah, in the time of Sukkot, this is the time Chag HaOsef, when you gather all the produce in the field. So there's a time now, the time of Maisris, and this is the time of Matnas Aniyim, and so on. So therefore you read the Inyan of Maisris. And then you skip from there, or you read Parshas HaMelech. You read Parshas HaMelech, which is actually go back to Parshas HaMelech, which is in Parshas Shoftim. And then you read the Brachos U'Klolos, right? You have to read the Brachos and Klolos, which are in Parshas Kisavai, all the Brachos and Klolos that were said on Har Grizim and Har Eival. Shegoymer Kol Parsha, and then you conclude all the whole entire Parsha, Brachos. You finish the whole Parsha of the Brachos and Klolos that it says there. Now Brachos Shekain Gadol Mevarech Aysan. The same brachas that the Kohen Gadol said on the Sefer Torah when he concluded reading on Yom Kippur, Hamelech mevarech Eisan. The king now makes those same brachas, Ella with one difference. Shenais and Shel Regalim tachas mechilas avim. The bracha that the Kohen Gadol said on Yom Kippur for the mechilas avainis in connection to Yom Kippur. So since this is Sukkot, you replace that bracha with the bracha of Mekadesh Yisrael v'Azmanim, which is a bracha in connection to the Yom Tov. That's what you read.
There's only one problem.
Sagt the Gemara, Bishmini Salkedaitoch, could you say that you read the Sefer Torah on the 8th day? It sounds like from the Mishnah it's saying, that you read on the 8th day of the Yom Tov. How could you say that? We just said that you read Matzah Yom Tov Rishon, which is the 2nd day of Sukkot. So how could you say Bishmini? So the Gemara answers that Eime Bishminis, what it means is Bishminis, which is going in the year. It means the 8th year. And now the Gemara asks, why do we need all of these different simonim that the pasuk tells us exactly when you read the Sefer Torah from the Sefer Torah and Hakel? As Rashi brings, what does it say in the pasuk? Miketz shnasa shmita. Then it also says b'chagas sukkis, and it says b'moyed. Why do you need all of these different things? Says the Gemara, the ikas rachmana miketz. If we would just say at the end of shmita, hava min nimnu mahashta. If we wouldn't say clearly Shemitah, actually, if we would only say Miketz at the end of 7 years, I would say even before Yidden began keeping Shemitah, which is only after they conquered Eretz Yisrael and they divided the land, only after 14 years did they begin counting the years of Shemitah. So right from the beginning, they could start counting 7 years, and then they could have the 8th year Hakel. Even if it doesn't come out to be a year after Shemitah. Therefore, the Torah says it has to be at the end of the year, 7 years when you keep Shemitah. Because of Rachmana Shemitah, if we would say at the end of the year of Shemitah, that Hakel is read from the Sefer Torah at the end of Shemitah. So the Torah says that it has to be in the Yom Tov, which is at the end of the year. There is no Yom Tov, so you know that it's at the beginning of the following year. Because of B'mayit, if we would say that it's in a Yom Tov, Havamina Mirei Shata, then I would say maybe it's the Yom Tov of the beginning of the year, the Yom Tov of Rosh Hashanah. Rashi says in Parshas Emor, when it says Elam Mayidei Hashem, one of the Yom Tovim is Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, Kotzer Rachmana b'Chag HaSukkos. So the Torah says b'Chag HaSukkos, so I know that it has to be Dafka in Chag HaSukkos. V'Kotzer Rachmana b'Chag HaSukkos. On the other hand, if the Torah would only write on Chag HaSukkos, Havamina afilu Yom Tov Achre. So then I would say maybe in Chag HaSukkos refers even to the last day of the Yom Tov. Kotzer Rachmana b'Voi Kol Yisrael. When all Yidden are arriving to be Oile Regel, when they arrive into the Beis HaMikdash, and when is that? Me'aschalte the Moyed. And that is from the beginning of the Yom Tov. That's when the mitzvah of Hakel is to read from the Sefer Torah. So here you have Rashi's pshat. If the Gemara says Aschal to the Moyed, so shouldn't that be on the first day of the Yom Tov? Why do we delay it to Motzi Yom Tov Rishon to the 2nd day? So Rashi says the reason is because you have to have a bima. The Mishnah says you build a platform for the Kohen Gadol, for the Melech, that is to read from the Sefer Torah standing on this platform, and you can't build this bima on the Yom Tov. You have to build it Motzi Yom Tov. Says Rashi, build it from before Yom Tov, and then you'll have it ready so you could use it on Yom Tov itself. Says Rashi, you can't have this bima there in the Azara because the Azara has to be empty, clear. Can't be there before that. So therefore, you have to wait until the 2nd day of Yom Tov in order to have this bima. That's Rashi's pshat. Tosfos asks on this. Just because of this bima, we're going to delay the Hakel for a day? If Minat Torah, the pasuk says that it has to be from the first day of the Yom Tov, how could you delay a Hakel just because of this bima? We can figure out what to do with this bima. Tosfos over here says that they would build a bima out of Yom Tov and they would make it from parts and they could assemble it. Even a Chalamayid, they wouldn't want to build a bima. A Chalamayid itself, you're not supposed to do stam malacha. So Tosfos says they would build it from before Yom Tov and then they would assemble it. Elamai Taisa says the fact that it can't be, it's not on the first day of Yom Tov is learned from the word bim mayid. Bim mayid means going into the Yom Tov. Bi. So therefore you know that it has to be on the second day of the Yom Tov. That's Tais's pshat. There's a sikha from the Rebbe that discusses Barichas the significance of this bima. And Rashi says that it was specifically a bima that was made from wood. And the Rebbe's point of the sikha is Barichas. First al Pinigla, the Rebbe explains, this is in Chelik Yutes in Parshas Vayelech. So first al Pinigla, the Rebbe explains, what was the point of the bima? It's two different things. Either it was for the honor of the Melech, like we saw, the whole thing is Parshas HaMelech. It's all about the king. So it's for his honor that he should be on a platform, or the point is for the Yidden, they should be able to hear, that it has to be in a bima, that the voice should carry as far as possible. And then the Rebbe says, Al Pichsidis, the idea of this bima over here is that to be read from the Sefer Torah, the whole union of Hakel was to bring the Achdus and the Bittul of the Yidden similar to the way it was by Har Sinai. But at the same time, when a person has Bittul, you have to also bavarin vayigba libay b'darkei Hashem. That he shouldn't see himself as just as a mat that everyone steps upon him. He has to also have strength and to be confident with himself when he serves the Eibusha. That's what the bima represents. But the Rebbe says it has to be dafka from wood, and it's only temporary because this vayigba libay is not something that is the ikir of the aveda. It's just a bavaran that he shouldn't become like an askupa and a dresses. The main thing in a person's aveda is the bittul to the Eibusha. That's the idea of this bima. That's why it's so important for the mitzvah of Hakel. Weiter, the Gemara says, it said in the Mishnah, "V'chazan hakneses noitel sefer Torah, and v'nois noil reish hakneses." The chazan, which is in Shamish, he gives it to the Gabbai, and then the Gabbai gives it to the Sagan, and so on. So the Gemara says, and we had a similar before regarding the Kohen Gadol, Shamit mina chalken kovod l'tamid v'malkem arab. Here it seems like you can give honor to a student in front of the teacher. You're giving honor to the ones that are on the lower level before you give the Sefer Torah to the Melech. Amar Abaye says, no, kula mishum kvoide de melech. It's all expressing the honor of the king to show how the king is higher than all these individuals. And the Mishnah said, "V'melech oimed makabel v'koire yoshev," and he reads from the Sefer Torah sitting. Agrifus hamelech amad v'kibel v'kara oimed. He read from the Sefer Torah when he was standing. In other words, he forgave his honor. Oimed miklal de yoshev. If it says in the Mishnah that he gets up to read from take the Sefer Torah, but I see that before this he's sitting in the Azara. But how can he sit in the Azara? V'ha'mamar en yeshiva b'Azara el malcha beis David bilvad. Only the kings of David, of the house of David and Melech, are allowed to sit in the Azara. Shenema v'yaveh Melech David v'yeshel l'fnei Melech l'fnei Hashem v'yem v'goymer. And over here we're talking about Agrifus HaMelech. He's not from Malchus beis David. There were other Malach. Rashi brings this Malchus beis Chashmonai. Agrifus HaMelech was not for sure not from the house of David and Melech. So how could it say that he got up? That means he was sitting before. It says the Gemara Kedamar Av Chizde be'Ezras Noshim, that Hakel was read in the Ezras Noshim, not in the Ezras Yisrael, which is really the kedusha of the Azara. Hanami be'Ezras Noshim. This is the Ezras Noshim, and therefore there you're allowed to sit. But then the Mishnah said, "V'shabchu Chachamim." Chachamim praised Agrifus for forgiving his honor and standing and reading from the Sefer Torah. Says the Gemara, "Shabchu." They praised him miklal the shaper of it. If they praised him, that seems that what he did was right, that he gave up of his honor, even though he was the king. Fragt the Gemara, but Rav Ashi didn't Rav Ashi say, even the opinion that says that a nasi, a leader amongst the Yidden, that gives up of his honor, so his honor is forgiven, and you do not have to give him honor. But melech shemachal kvoidoi, ein kvoidoi machal, a king cannot forgive his honor. So how is Shanema Soim Tasim Alecha Melech Shetehei Masi Alecha Soim Tasim? It says a double lashon. His fear has to be upon you, and he has no right to give up his honor. That's the Gemara mitzvah shani. Usually, a king can't give up from his honor, but for the purpose of a mitzvah, even a king could forgive his honor. And here, he was standing for the purpose of the mitzvah to read from the Sefer Torah. Then the Mishnah said when he came to the pasuk that says he shouldn't appoint a guy upon you as a king, so he cried, at that time, Soine Yisrael, which is a euphemism, it's going on Yidden themselves, they became liable to be destroyed. They flattered Agrifus, telling him that he could be a king, even though he was not supposed to be a king. True, he was a Yid because his mother is a Yid, but in order to be able to be a king, you have to have a father that's a Yid as well. So here there's a discussion about this in Tosfos Rashi. Rashi says that even though only his mother was a Yid, but he was a Yid. Of course, his mother's a Yid, he's allowed to be a king. The reason why he couldn't be a king is because he's an Evet. He came from Avodim, and it's not appropriate for an Evet, for a slave, to be appointed as a king. That's the reason Rashi says. Tosfos says, what's the reason? Because there's a double lashon in the pasuk, and you learn out that for a melech, it's not enough if his mother is a yid; his father has to be a yid as well, and therefore he can't be a king. That's Tosfos' pshat. The Rebbe also discussed this Gemara in Tafshim Ches in the year of Hakel, and then the Rebbe said that it seems like the Gemara here is bringing this brayse not as a conclusion of the story that's brought in the Mishnah, but it's actually it must have happened in a different time. If you look in the Mishnah says that Chachamim praised Agrifis. It doesn't say anything more. It seems like the Chachamim accepted and praised him. But here Rab Nassan is saying that really this was a mistake and this was wrong, and it was a chanufa, they were flattering him, and they weren't supposed to do this. So the Rebbe says it must have been that in the time that Agrifis was a king, there were two different hackles that happened. And once they were mishabeach him, and the Chachamim in that time period held that he's allowed to be a king. And the Rebbe says there's two different things over here. Number one, the question is he b'chalal allowed to be a king? And there was a difference of opinion about this, whether his father has to be a Yid as well. And there's another detail over here, even if he's allowed to be a king, when it says that the Melech and Hakel has to read from the Sefer Torah, does that have to be a Melech Mamish? What's if you don't have a Melech? Could it be someone else that's similar to a Melech? That's a Nasi. So therefore, even if he wasn't Mamish a Melech, but he was the closest or the best that they had, and therefore he could read from the Sefer Torah. That's what our Mishnah held. And therefore in the Mishnah, they weren't flattering him. This is what the Chachamim at that time period held. 7 years later, it was already closer to the Churban, the Chachamim changed their opinion, and they said that he's not allowed to be the Melech, and they still flattered him. And that's what our Gemara is talking about in the Schai V'Sayni Yisrael. So the Gemara Vaitis, so here the Gemara until the end of the Pedic discusses this an inyan of chanufa, when you flatter someone that's doing Averis. From the time when the strength of chanifos, of flattering someone, came strong in the world, nisafsu hadinim. So judgment to judge people became all crooked because the dayanim, the judges, so they're flattering. They're not really looking at people honestly and judging them the way it should be. And people's behavior also got ruined because people are doing averis and nobody is protesting against it. They're being flattered. So nobody could say anymore that my actions are better than yours because people are just learning from everyone that's doing Averis and are just getting compliments. One is allowed to flatter the Rishoyim in this world. We're talking about a Rasha, a guy that could come and stop you from fulfilling mitzvahs. So if you're not going to flatter him, so then he's going to cause you problems. So you're just doing it in order to be able to fulfill mitzvahs. So that's allowed. Shanama, as we see in the pasuk, it says, novel nadiv. When Mashiach comes, then we won't refer to a novel person that's despicable as a nadiv, as generous, and a person that's a kila, a person that takes everything for himself and he drinks wine for himself. He won't be called a shua. He won't be called generous. This goes on when Mashiach comes. Now, chanifa is allowed if it's done for the right purpose, in order that this person shouldn't disturb you. It's allowed. Shem ben Lakish says, we could learn it from what Yaakov did when he came to and he approached Esav. He says to him, he speaks to Esav and he says, I've seen the Abish's face, and he appeased me. So Yaakov is speaking to Esav and saying, he's flattering him basically. So we see that Yaakov did this, so Esav shouldn't disturb him. Says the Gemara, but this pshat of Rab Shimon ben Lakish applied to Rab Levi. He argues on what Rab Levi said. The Amar Rab Levi, Mashal she Yaakov Esav, to understand what Yaakov was doing, so you compare it to the following. What is this compared to? Person invites his friend, and you realize that this person is inviting you with bad intentions. He wants to harm you, he wants to kill you. So Amalai, so you tell him, Tam tafshel zeh, taste this food here. Shani tayim ketafshel shetamte beveis hamelach. This food is delicious. I taste it. It's just like the food that I tasted when I was by the house of the king, in the palace. So Omar, now this person hears what you're saying. Yadale malka. He goes to the palace of the king. Mistafi v'leikardale. So then he'll be afraid and he won't kill you. So that's what Yaakov was doing. Yaakov was saying that that I saw the Eibishter, he wasn't trying to appease or flatter Esav. He was just trying to say to Esav that be careful. Amar Rabbi Elazar says, Kol adam sheyesh bei chanufa, a person that has this midah of chanufa, flattering and complimenting, a person that does averis, maybe af lo'ilam, he brings anger of Hashem to the world. Shanam, the pasuk says, V'cham filev yisimu af, one that have this chanufa, they bring anger of Hashem. Not only this, the Eibush doesn't listen to his tefillah. Shenema, the pasuk says, Lo yishavu ki asaram. That I will not listen to when they scream to me ki asaram. I bring them yisurim. Asaram Rashi says, I bring yisurim of them in this world, and the Eibush says, I will not listen to them. The Gemara brings a simin for the continuation of the things that the Gemara will say here. Simin af oive gehenim biyade nida goyla. Okay, we'll try to learn over here till the end of the Perek. It's one subject here about this chanufa. Rabbi Elazar said, Kol adam sheyesh bei chanufa, a person that has this terrible mid of chanufa, afila oy ubrin shebimei iman mekal l'noisai. Even the fetus in the womb of a mother also cursed this individual. Shanem, as the pasuk says, oima l'rasha tzaddik. You tell a person that's a rasha that he's a tzaddik, ato that you're a tzaddik, yikfu amim yizamu lo'umim. The nations and the lo'umim, they curse you. Ve'en koiv ala klala. Koiv means that they curse you. Shanem alei kabe keil, as we see from that pasuk. And ve'en lo'im elo ubrin, and the oim refers over here to the fetuses. Shanem, as the pasuk says, lo'im eloim yamatz, which was referring to the time of pregnancy. Rabbi Elazar said further, person that has this mid of chanufa, he falls into Gehenim. Shenemet, the pasuk says, ra. So they're flattering and complimenting someone that's doing things that are bad. And then maksiv achrav, what does the pasuk say? Therefore, that will be burnt up like straw that's burnt in a fire. Rabbi Elazar said further, a person that has this midah of chanufa to his friend, saif neiful biyadai. In the end, he will fall into his hands, in the negative sense. And if he doesn't fall into his hands, neiful biyad banov. Then his children, he'll fall into his children's hands. Neiful biyad banov, neiful biyad ben benai. He'll fall into his grandchildren's hands. Where do we see this? Shenema, we see by Yirmiyah lechananya. Amen. Ken yas Hashem, Yakim Hashem es dvarecha. So this was Yirmiyah speaking to Hananya that said the nevuah of Sheker. Rashi here brings after Yechonya and the Kalim of the Beis Hamikdash were exiled out of Eretz Yisrael, and Hananya came and said a nevuah Sheker that Eibush is going to return it. And when he said it to Yirmiyah, what did Yirmiyah say to him? Yeah, it's true. Halavai, the Eibush should do this. And really, he knew he was saying Sheker. So there was a chanufa. He was flattering him. The pasuk says, "Vayiyu b'shar b'yamin." Then later, Yirmiyah was by Shar b'yamin. B'sham bal p'chida is Shema Yiriyah ben Shalmiah ben Chananya. So then this grandson of Chananya was there, and what happened? Vayitbos es Yirmiyahu Navi, and he grabbed Yirmiyahu Lema and he told him, "Ala kastem atanefel. You're going to the custom. You're going to the Persians, and you're going to tell them about the Yidden. Vayemi Yirmiyahu sheker and any neifel ala custom. I'm not going to the custom." But the ksiv vayitbos es Yirmiyahu vayiviyehu ala Sodom. He brought Yirmiyahu to the minister. So here you see that he flattered his grandfather Hananya, and then he fell into the hands of his grandson, into this individual with the name of Yiriyah. Rabbi Elazar further said about this mid of Chanufa. Call eidosh yeshpa Chanufa. A congregation that has this midah of chanufa, flattering those that do averis, mu'usa kenida, is despicable like a nida that has to remain separated. Shenema, as it says in the pasuk, Kiadas chanav galmud. The congregation that's chanav, that has this midah of chanufa, is galmud. What does galmud mean? Shekaim b'krachei hayam kain lenida galmuda. And there are places that they refer to a nida as galmuda. What does galmuda mean? The Gemara says, "My galmuda gumula da mi baila." That this woman is separated from her husband. Rabbi Elazar said further, congregation that has this midah of chanufa l'seif gaila. In the end, they will be exiled. Ksiv acha, the pasuk says here, ki adas chanav galmud, that the congregation that has chanav is galmud. What does galmud mean? Ksiv hasam v'amarta b'levavecha mi yal li'esela v'ani shkula v'galmuda, uses the same term as galmuda, which means being alone. And then it says gaila v'suda, that they go into exile and they go away. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba says, Arba kittais. There are 4 different groups. A, mekablois pnei shchina. They do not receive the shchina, pnei shchina. Kat leitzim, those that are leitzim. people that sit around and make jokes. Kat chanefim, people that are flattering others that do averis, and kat shkarim, people that lie, and kat mesapri lashon hara, and those that say lashon hara. Now the pshat of this Gemara is, this is even people that learn a lot of Torah and do a lot of mitzvahs, but nevertheless, if they have this behavior, they can't see Pnei Shechina. I once remember hearing a sikha from the Rebbe said, could be they may have a connection to Shechina because they're learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, but Pnei Shechina, which is a higher level of that, they want to have a connection to because of what they're doing. And the Gemara brings the pasuk where it says that kat leitzim, the chsiv mashach yodei es leitzitzim, that he's sitting together with these leitzitzim. So the Eibusher mashach yodei, the Eibusher pulls away his hand from them. Kat chanefim, the chsiv kiloi lefanov chanav yaveh. In front of Hashem, the people that are chanav do not come. Kat shkarim, people that say lie, the chsiv devi shkarim leyikin lenegadeinai, cannot come in front of Hashem. Kat mesapri lashon hara, the chsiv kiloi kel chafetz resha ata lo yigur chara. Tzadik ata Hashem, lo yagur b'magur chara, that the ones that say lashon hara are not together with the Eibusher. And Ashi here brings that in that pasuk over there, it speaks about lashon hara, that these Tzshayim can't be together with the Eibusher. Hadron, Allah, Elu Namarim. This is the conclusion of the 7th Perek of the Sotah.